We're counting down 10 forgotten meals that poor man ate every single day in 1950s America. These were the meals people back then depended on when the money was gone by Wednesday and payday was still days away. From one-pot dishes that turned scraps into something filling, to meals so simple they never made it into any cookbook, each one shows how different survival looked compared to today's expensive, convenience-driven food. Expect combinations most people wouldn't recognize, and a few that actually worked better than you'd think. Which of these forgotten meals still makes sense today? Let's start the countdown. Number 10. Fried bologna sandwiches. For a lot of men, this was the quickest hot meal you could make without spending much at all. A thick slice of bologna went straight into a hot pan, and if you didn't cut those small slits around the edges, it would curl up into a bowl shape almost instantly. Cooked until the outside turned dark and slightly crisp, it was then placed on plain white bread, usually with just mustard. There was no extra layering, no sides, nothing fancy. It was made in minutes, eaten just as fast, and it did exactly what it needed to do. The smell of it frying filled the kitchen in a way that felt more substantial than the ingredients actually were. Most people forgot this, but it wasn't just a snack, it was a full meal for many working men. Today, it might seem too basic, but back then, having something hot, cheap, and filling mattered more than anything else. Number 9. Cornbread and buttermilk. This was one of those meals that only makes sense once you see how it was actually eaten. Leftover cornbread from the night before wasn't thrown away. It was crumbled straight into a glass or bowl. Then, cold buttermilk got poured over it until everything softened just enough to eat with a spoon. It didn't require cooking, which mattered after a long day. The cornbread held its texture while soaking up that tangy, slightly sour buttermilk, creating something simple but surprisingly satisfying. Some people added a pinch of salt, others left it plain. Almost nobody does this now, but for many, this was a regular supper, especially in the summer when hot meals weren't appealing. Today, it might seem unusual, but back then, it was quick, cheap, and it worked. Number 8. Pinto beans and cornbread. This was the kind of meal that quietly showed up multiple times a week. A pot of pinto beans sat on the stove for hours, slowly softening, sometimes with a small piece of pork, if there was any, sometimes with nothing but salt and water. Cornbread baked alongside it, usually in a cast-iron pan, with edges that came out slightly crisp. When it was time to eat, a lot of people didn't even keep them separate. They crumbled the cornbread right into the beans, letting it soak up that thick, starchy broth. There was a small trick to it, letting the beans cook low and slow, without stirring too much so they didn't break apart too early. The result was simple but deeply filling, with a soft texture and just enough flavor to keep you going. Most people don't realize how often this was eaten, but it fed entire families for very little. Today, it's still around, but back then, it wasn't comfort food, it was routine. Number 7. Mulligan Stew. This is where things got unpredictable. Mulligan Stew didn't have a real recipe. It depended entirely on what was left in the kitchen. A pot went on the stove, and whatever scraps were around got added in. Potatoes, onions, maybe a bit of leftover meat if there was any. Some nights it turned out rich and hearty, other nights it was thinner and plain. People didn't measure anything, they just kept it simmering until everything softened and blended together. A small trick was letting it cook longer than expected, so the flavors had time to come together. It usually got served straight from the pot, no presentation, just a ladle into a bowl. The smell alone told you something warm was coming, even if you didn't know exactly what. Almost nobody makes it this way now, But back then, it was how leftovers stretched into another full meal without wasting anything. Number 6. Chipped beef on toast. This one showed up in a lot of kitchens, especially for men who had military experience. Thin slices of dried, salted beef were taken out of the jar and usually rinsed quickly to cut some of that salt. Then it was cooked into a simple white sauce made from flour, fat, and milk. The key was getting that sauce just thick enough so it clung to the meat without turning too heavy. Poured over plain toast, it turned into a hot, filling meal that looked simple but carried a strong, salty flavor with a creamy texture underneath. Some people added extra black pepper, others let the saltiness stand on its own. It wasn't fancy, but it stretched well and fed more than one person from a small amount. Today, it's mostly remembered as an old-fashioned dish, but back then it was practical, affordable, and showed up on the table more often than people realize.
Number 5. Crackers and milk. This is one most people don't even think of as a real meal anymore. A handful of plain crackers got broken up into a glass or bowl, then covered with cold milk and eaten with a spoon. That was it. There was no cooking, no preparation, which made it common after long work days when nobody wanted to stand over a stove. The crackers softened just enough to hold together, turning slightly creamy without fully dissolving. Some people added a bit of sugar. Others even sprinkled black pepper, depending on what they were used to. It sounds too simple, but it filled you up just enough and cost almost nothing. For many, this wasn't a snack, it was supper. Today it feels unusual, but back then, quick, cheap, and filling was all that mattered. Number 4. Tomato gravy and biscuits. This came together on nights when there was no meat left, but people still wanted something hot. A can of tomatoes went straight into a pan with a bit of leftover grease, then flour was stirred in slowly until it thickened into a smooth gravy. The trick was not rushing it, letting it cook just long enough so the raw taste of the flour disappeared and everything blended together. Fresh biscuits, or even day-old ones, were split open and covered in that rich, slightly tangy gravy. It didn't look like much, but the smell filled the kitchen fast, and it had more flavor than you'd expect from something so simple. Almost nobody makes it this way now, but back then, it turned a near-empty kitchen into a full meal without much effort.
Number 3. Neckbones and Rice. This is one a lot of people today wouldn't recognize right away. Pork neck bones were one of the cheapest cuts you could get, but they carried a lot more flavor than they looked like they would. They went into a pot with water, onions, and seasoning, then simmered low for hours. As they cooked, the broth slowly thickened and turned rich without needing anything extra. The small bits of meat softened enough to pull off by hand, and nothing went to waste. Rice was often added into that same pot, soaking up all that flavor as it cooked. Eating it took a little patience, picking around the bones, but that was normal. The texture ended up tender, slightly sticky, and much more filling than expected. Most people forgot this, but it was a regular meal that stretched a few cheap ingredients into something that could feed more than one person easily. Number 2. Savory Oatmeal. This is where expectations really shift, because oatmeal wasn't sweet back then. It was cooked with water, a bit of salt, and sometimes a small spoon of fat if there was any available. That was the whole meal. It came out thick, almost heavy, the kind that stayed on the spoon without running. People ate it slowly because it filled you up more than you'd expect. There was no sugar, no fruit, just a plain, steady flavor that did its job. What made it practical was how far it stretched. A small amount could feed more than one person, and nothing went to waste. Leftovers were often poured into a pan, left to set overnight, then sliced and fried the next day until the edges turned crisp. Almost nobody eats it this way now, but back then, it wasn't about taste. It was about having something reliable that kept you going. Number 1. Salt pork and field peas. This was one of the most dependable meals people had, especially when money was tight. A small piece of salt pork went into a pot with field peas and water, then everything simmered slowly for hours. As it cooked, that little bit of pork released just enough fat and flavor to carry the entire pot. The peas softened and the broth thickened on its own, turning into something much richer than you'd expect from so few ingredients. Most people didn't even need much meat in the bowl. The flavor had already spread through everything. Cornbread often sat on the side, ready to soak up what was left. It was simple, affordable, and it worked every single time. That's why it stayed at number 1, not because it was special, but because it never failed to feed people when they needed it most. So, looking back at these meals, it's clear people didn't need much to make something work. Some of these might seem unusual today, but back then, they were part of everyday life. Which one would you actually try? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this, don't forget to subscribe and share it with someone who might remember a few of these.